Welcome back to my channel. I'm Joe with Smokin Joe's Pit Barbecue. So I've recently smoked quite a bit of briskets and I've used some beef tallow to try to end up with a good solid brisket. And there was nothing wrong with those briskets. In fact, one of those briskets was the best I've ever had. I've used a select brisket with tallow. I've used a prime brisket with tallow. But what happens if you use a Wagyu brisket and not use tallow and let it rest for 14 hours? We're about to find out. Stay tuned. All right, so let's get started on this brisket. We're starting with a 14¼ pound Wagyu brisket from Midland Meat Company. So I'm just gonna take it out of the package. Be careful not to cut the flat or the point. All right, so here's our brisket. We do have a little bit of silver skin and some fat to take off. And I like to start right here with the decal. Just take that off. Now, Midland Meat Company does a really nice job of pre-trimming these briskets prior to them shipping them out, as you can see. But there is a little bit of trimming that I will be doing. Keep in mind that you want to make sure that your brisket is rounded on the edges. Make it as aerodynamic as possible. You guys know that I do make sausage, so I will be keeping the trimmings for the next sausage batch. Now this edge is a little thin, so I'm gonna round this off here in a little bit. All right, so as I mentioned, this edge is a little thin, so I'm gonna be trimming that back quite a bit actually. Just gonna take about ½ an inch off this edge. All the way back, get rid of this really thin edge. Okay, that looks really good right there. Now we got to cut this edge right here, which is really thin as well. And we're going to round off this corner at the same time. We're going to come around like this, take this edge off, and come up this way, okay? Pretty simple. I'm using a 7-inch Gladiator Series boning knife from Delstrong. And this bad boy is extremely sharp, so be careful. I do have a cut glove under my nitrile glove here. There you go, that looks really good. Okay, let's take a look at that fat cap. Okay, I'm gonna bring this point down just a little bit more. Now these dark spots that you see on these briskets, you gotta remember that these are dry aged from Midland Meat Company, okay? And sometimes you will get that kind of darker colored meat, as you see here. Now I like about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch fat cap on my briskets. So I'm just going to expose this really nice looking white fat that you see right here. And leave about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch of the fat cap. All right, so I've got the brisket all nicely trimmed up. Got that fat cap to about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. And take a look at the flat, just looking really nice. So I'm going to be using some mustard as a binder. Just a little bit. Like I said before, I think that mustard really grabs a hold of the rub and creates a really nice bark on your brisket. And you guys that use mustard know that you will not be able to taste this mustard once our brisket is smoked. Now I'm going to be smoking this with a fat cap up on my Yodel Frontiersman. So I'm going to start with seasoning the flat with my SPG, which is salt, pepper, garlic, paprika, and a little bit of cumin. Pat that rub down. Let's season that fat cap. My rub is really heavy on the pepper, as you can see. It's got an amazing flavor. I will be leaving the ingredients down inside the description box if you guys are interested in making my version of this SPG. All right, I'm going to season at the edges. I've got my Yodel Frontiersman running at 250 degrees. We'll see you guys outside. All right, so I've got my Yodel Frontiersman running at 250 degrees. Now I'm going to smoke this at 250 for the first couple hours. Then I'm going to ramp the temperature up to 275 after 2 hours. So let's grab our brisket. Put it right in the middle. Man, that is a slick looking brisket. Laying nice and flat, and that's what you want. All right, so I'm gonna let the brisket smoke for 2 hours. I'll bring you guys back at that point. Stay tuned. All right, so the brisket has been smoking for 2 hours. Let's see what it looks like. Oh yeah. I can tell you just by looking at it that the bark is not quite set. So I'm not gonna start spritzing for probably another hour or so. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and ramp the temperature up to 275. Again, we were running at 250 for the first 2 hours. So in about an hour, I'm going to go ahead and start spritzing with some apple cider vinegar and water. I'm looking for a nice bark. That's usually going to happen about 170 degrees. I'll bring you guys back right before I wrap it. All right, so we are at the 4.5 hour mark, and that brisket is about to come off. It's sitting at about 167 degrees. I just spritzed it again. So I'm going to be wrapping it, but before I do that, I want to show you guys what I do to wrap my briskets with the butcher paper. So I fold it in probably 4 inches, okay? And that's both pieces of butcher paper. I've got 2 pieces right here, just roughly 4 inches. It doesn't have to be exact. Now I did see this, I believe it was Matt Pittman that did this, a well-respected man in barbecue. He did something similar to this, okay? So this is how I do it. I just fold both edges in about 4 inches or so, and then pick the bottom one out, and then lift the bottom flap and put the top flap under it, okay? Real simple. If you're doing this by yourself, it could be a little bit of a challenge, but you'll get it. There we go, just like that, okay? So now I have created this lock, if you will, on my butcher paper. So just a little trick I wanted to show you. Let me go grab that brisket. All right, so here's our brisket. 4.5 hours later, the internal temperature has hit 170 degrees, and I've got the bark that I want on the brisket. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it. Now remember, I said no beef tallow, okay? So I'm just gonna spritz it with apple cider vinegar and water, mix it 50-50. Wet that paper a little bit as well. Smells absolutely delicious. And this brisket did shrink a little bit as well. Okay, so just fold your paper over, fold it over the top, lay it flat, fold the other side over, and lay it flat. Turn, fat cap is down. Fat cap is up. Fold the excess and tuck it under your brisket. All right, Just like that, this is going back inside my smoker until it's nice and tender. All right, so the brisket is ready and the total cook time was 9 hours. And I gotta tell you that butcher paper is extremely drenched, okay? Remember, we didn't put any beef tallow or nothing. So I'm gonna let it cool down here on my counter until it hits about 160 degrees. Then I'm gonna pop it inside my PK100, run it at 160 and let it sit there for about 14 hours. Okay, let me spin this around. So there's our beautiful brisket right there. I'm just gonna leave it unwrapped here on my counter again, probably 40 minutes or so. Let it come down on temperature, pop it inside my PK100. We'll see you guys tomorrow after the 14-hour rest. All right, so our brisket has been resting for 14 hours. Now I do want to show you the setup on my PK100 smoker. Now, by the way, I did make an audible and I ran the temperature at 155 degrees instead of 160 because I just felt that 160 was a little too hot. All right, so there's the brisket. I have it on the third shelf from the top, and I did put my water pan in here. Now, one thing that I did different on this cook is I put the water pan on a shelf instead of directly on the burner. And as you can see, I still have half a pan of water. So that's what I recommend if you guys have a PK100 smoker or are planning on getting one and you plan on resting your briskets like this, is to put your water pan on a shelf instead of directly on the burner. The water just lasts longer and you're still going to create that nice humid environment. So let's grab this brisket, take it inside and see how we did. All right, so before I slice into the brisket, I do want to recap real quick with you guys on what we did to get to this point. I smoked this brisket at 250 degrees for 2 hours and then 275 degrees for 7 hours. That got the internal temperature to about 204 degrees when it was nice and tender. At that point, I took it out, let it rest right here on my counter until it came down to 160 degrees. Then I popped it inside my PK100 smoker. So since the brisket was already smoked, I didn't add any sawdust to the sawdust pan. In fact, I used that sawdust pan and filled it up with water and put it directly on top of the shelf, right above the burner, but not directly on the burner. It's been resting for 14 hours. Let's slice into it. All right, so let's see how we did on the brisket right here. I gotta tell you, the pan has a ton of beef tallow in it, okay? So that's one of the things that it did render down to the bottom of the pan. Let's check this bad boy out. Look at that, nice and jiggly. All right, so let's slice into this brisket. I am using my Dell Strong 12-inch slicer. Again, check out the links if you guys are interested in buying any of the knives that I use in this video. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is take this point off, and let's take a look at that money shot. Look at that. That is really nice and juicy. Oh yes. Really nice smoke ring. Let's cut our point in half. Good gosh. That is extremely moist. And that fat rendered to the point where the fat is nice and yellow, as you can see on the top of the brisket here as well. So this is fantastic. Now this piece right here makes some fantastic burnt ends. So you can take this off and cut it into cubes. That's gonna be absolutely delicious. So let's take a couple of slices from the flat. Now this flat was a little thin right here. It's still gonna be good, but that might be a little dry, okay? So I'm just gonna take a couple of slices. Look at that, it's just falling all over itself. And the brisket itself has a really nice dark color. That's one of the things that I notice immediately. Sometimes the flat will kind of have a white color. Well, this one definitely has a much darker color. Look at that. That right there is money. Oh man, look at that hang test. It's not falling apart. Look at that. extremely tender. I am really happy with the results of this brisket. Again, we started with a premium brisket, a Wagyu brisket. So this is what you get when you do start with a Wagyu brisket, but I didn't add any tallow or anything that might change the results of the cook. All right, I'm gonna get a few more slices. We'll come back and give it a taste. All right, so let's give this brisket a try and see how we did. Now, I wanna remain 100% transparent with you guys. So I purchased this brisket from Midland Meat Company. They did not give me this brisket. So I do wanna mention that just in case you guys were wondering. So let's try the flat first. Again, beautiful color, beautiful smoke ring. Look at that. Oh man, that fat is nice and yellow. Hopefully you guys can see that. Let's give it a try. Wow, wow, wow. All right, so that piece of the flat has an amazing flavor, really good smoky flavor, really juicy. Again, after a 14-hour rest, this is the result that you get. Now let's try this point. Look at that bark. You can see how juicy it is, okay? And that bark is absolutely fantastic. Let's give it a try and see how we did on the point, my favorite piece. All right, so that point is absolutely savage tasting, really nice and tender, really good smoky flavor, and really nice and juicy. That fat just melts in your mouth like butter. This is absolutely fantastic. Let's try one of these delicious burnt ends right here. Here we go. All right, so overall on this cook, I am extremely impressed with that 14-hour hold time. I did a video where I held the brisket for 10 hours, and that was absolutely fantastic. But starting with a premium brisket, like a Wagyu brisket, and letting it rest for 14 hours also does something very magical to the brisket. It's almost like it relaxes and the juices really do run back inside of the brisket. Now, I've been to a lot of popular barbecue spots in Texas, and I've seen the raw briskets from Franklin Barbecue and Evie Mae's Barbecue, and both of those briskets had really nice marbling on the flat and the point, similar to the brisket that I use today. Now, I'm not saying that Franklin Barbecue or Evie Mae's Barbecue is using Wagyu briskets. I know that they're using prime briskets or super prime briskets because of the marbling that I've seen on those briskets. So if you want to spoil yourself a little bit, grab yourself one of these Midland Meat Company briskets, get a hold of Adrian there at the shop and ask him if he will ship to you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If this is your first time here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And as always, if you have any questions, ask them down below. Until next time, Joe with Smokin Joe's Barbecue. See ya.